Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. One of the most challenging things we face in life is dysfunctional relationships. This could be found in the family, it could be found at the job site, it could be found in the church. Wherever we have relationships, we are susceptible to dysfunctional relationships. Times in which we have relationships with people that aren't particularly ideal. They're not functioning the way that they ought to function. And it causes a lot of friction and hardship. And these are hard to deal with because relationships are hard to begin with. And then when you have a dysfunctional relationship, it becomes all the more difficult. And we can become very discouraged by these dysfunctional relationships if we're not careful. And it might be that we become so distracted by them and so discouraged by them that we cease to seek God's will in the various situations that we find ourselves in where there are these dysfunctional relationships. We might think, well, if my husband was perfect, or my wife did everything just perfectly, or my kids were acting the way that I think they should act, if I had the perfect life at home, or if at work everyone got along and supported one another, or if the church functioned exactly as it was supposed to, that then somehow I could open myself up to the will of God, and then I could expect God to really work in my life and work in my family and be active in my workplace and really carry out his desire in the church. And we might begin to think that these dysfunctional relationships are somehow a problem for God, that as long as these relationships are dysfunctional, that God can't operate, as though perhaps he's sitting up in heaven and just waiting for us to get it all together before he can actually work in our lives. Well, if we think that, we should really take to heart our reading today in Genesis chapter 27. If ever there was a dysfunctional family, it was Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Esau. There you have favoritism. You have Isaac loving Esau better than Jacob. You have Rebekah loving Jacob more than Esau. You have deception. You have jealousy. You have hatred. You have almost every ingredient one might need for a dysfunctional family. However, what's amazing is, despite all of that, God's will still gets accomplished. Yes, Jacob deceives his brother. Yes, Jacob deceives his father. Yes, Rebekah plays a part in that as well. Yes, there is a lot of bickering and difficulty there. But you know what? God still gets what he originally desired, that the older would serve the younger, that the younger brother would be the one who would carry on the blessing. And God's will continues to be done as Jacob is then prompted by this situation to go down and find a wife. He ends up finding Rachel and Leah and marrying them and having the 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes of Israel, through whom then eventually the Messiah would come, in which God would redeem all those who would come to him in faith. And so God's will is still going to be done. It's just done in a very difficult way, at least from the human perspective. And this should be encouragement for us as we find ourselves in the midst of chaos in the various relationships that we're in. Even though our relationships might be challenging, even though we might be surrounded by people who are perhaps not acting the way that we think they should act, maybe they are backbiting and lying and cheating and stealing and doing all these things, it doesn't mean that we can't still be in tune to God's will and still be listening for and praying for God's will to be done in this situation. God's not hindered by people. God's not hindered by these relationships. And we can still open ourselves up to his power and his might and his purpose, whether it's at the church or at the home or at the workplace. Or wherever it might be, God can still accomplish his will. So if any of us in our group today find ourselves in the midst of chaos and dysfunctional relationships, let's be encouraged today by our reading and pray that God's will would be done in all situations and in all circumstances, and submit to his will. And with that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.